Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 13, Episode 150. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us here this Friday, Steelers Nation, this final day of June, as everybody around the country getting ready for the 4th of July. Dave, how you doing?
Doing good on this Friday, and it's been a busy morning already. We got several interviews hitting the internet this morning. Pat Freiermuth was on. Which one was he on?
Pardon My Take.
Yeah, Pardon My Take. And you had Alejandro Villanueva on the Kelsey podcast. You had Levi Wallace on Good Morning Football this morning, and yeah, looks like it's gonna be a busy Friday. And the Steelers could make it better if they go ahead and get that Alex Highsmith contract extension done on this Friday. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Normally, when you see them do these contract extensions, I think generally you see them hit like on Wednesday or Thursday, right around in there. I think that's when you see the majority of those things. And I don't know, my money was kind of on Highsmith getting that thing done by July 1st, but here we are, June 30th. It doesn't look like it's going to get done by there. There's no reason to worry. I mean, it's just, that's just a prediction as far as when maybe that could be done. And a lot of that was based really on this team getting Minkah Fitzpatrick done not too long after mandatory minicamp had ended, or right there in the middle of mandatory minicamp a year ago there. They obviously still have a lot of time to get this done. I firmly believe they will get it done with him by week 1 of the regular season. It just doesn't look like it's going to happen by July 1st. I don't know. Maybe it'll surprise us later this afternoon. But as of right now, it doesn't look like it's going to get done by July 4th weekend.
Sure, but the day is young.
Or the week of July 4th, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we'll see. All it takes is in the next 5 minutes, something could drop out of nowhere. Usually these things just kind of come. You refresh Twitter and you see the tweet and the news is in. So we'll just kind of wait and see, and still think a deal will get done before week 1, which is all really that ultimately matters. Not a tremendous amount of breaking news today. We do want to maybe touch on the Freiermuth and especially the Villanueva podcast, because you don't get to hear from that guy very often. But before we do that, Dave, and we mentioned this before, kind of talk about this topic each year, but you think you've done some more research and background on the Steelers post OTA and minicamp signings and how the roster, in terms of the guys that will make the 53, there's probably at least one outsider who's not a Steeler today who will be part of that team when they take on the 49ers in week 1. So kind of expand on your thoughts and your research there.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this before we, I guess it was either in our last show or the show before that we did. And I have since compiled and updated the info on what I consider the post off-season program, portion of the off season there before week 1. And what I did is I went back and all the way back to 2012 to look at the players that the Steelers signed after mandatory minicamp ended, that ended up, that they signed that ended up making the week 1 53-man roster that year. And look, I mean, just go back to last year alone. This team had 3 players, and not just signed, traded for or acquired off waivers or anything of that nature. So let me be specific in that this is just not signings. It's just additions overall, no matter how they got there. And last year, this team had 3 players that they added to the offseason roster that wound up making the week 1 53-man roster. Those players being Larry Ogunjobi, who, of course, they had signed to a one-year deal on June 21st. And the two others were players they traded for, Malik Reed and Jesse Davis. And both those guys were acquired via trade on August 30th, right before the start of the regular season. And, man, you go back to even 2021, you had 4 players after mandatory minicamp had ended that this team either signed or traded for that ended up on the 53-man roster. Trey Turner, Melvin Ingram, Joe Schobert, Kella Witherspoon. What's funny is all 4 of those guys are no longer with the with the team at this point here. And just going over historically all the way back to 2012 for the same set of criteria. Only 1 year, 2019, did the team not have at least 2 such acquisitions after mandatory minicamp that ended up being on the week 1 53-man roster. In total, going back from 2022 to 2012, 34 such additions there, which obviously averages out to just a little bit more than three a year within that. And another interesting aspect of this, of those 34 players that I compiled on this list dating back to 2012, 11 of them, which is what nearly a third of them, were acquired via trade. So on average, 3 a year. Only 1 year has there not been, such a player added, that fits this criteria after mandatory minicamp. And, really a third of those have been acquired via trade. So what does it mean as I look at what's his name? On
Brian Windhorst.
Yeah, Brian Windhorst on my TV right now. It looks like he's on was it PFT or something like that? But it means that, history shows us that there's a good chance that this team adds, 1 or 2 more players moving forward that end up making the 53-man roster here. Now, since this year's mandatory minicamp has ended a couple of weeks ago, we've already seen 2 players added, right? Nick Kwiatkowski and Rex Sonihara. So technically there's two possibilities already on the board this summer that would, could potentially maybe make the 53-man roster in some way, shape, or form here. But even beyond that, I think you're going to see 1, 2, 3 more maybe that at least added between now and week 1 that end up potentially making the 53-man roster. So if you're doing those 53-man roster predictions, and I'm sure we got a couple of them coming on the site here pretty soon again, maybe leave in a to be named later spot or something along those lines.
Just write them in pencil, not pen. A lot will change. Injuries, of course, will impact things. Even the 2 guys that have been signed, and Sonihara and I keep saying Kwiatkowski because that's where my brain goes to. It might be like Kwiatkowski. We're gonna work on it, but he may make this team. I think he's got a good shot to make this team. That veteran inside linebacker depth, special teams ability that Pittsburgh signed him to be. So it's possible. I would say it's reasonable to expect one of those 2 signings to make the team. It's possible both make it. So right off the bat, there's 2, and there could be more added as you get through. Again, trades, waiver claims, injuries that open up positions, where you feel like you have to add. All that's on the table come August.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think you look at a couple of positions that, when it groups when it comes to this 90-man roster right now. We've talked about slot cornerback all off season there. And they have Chandon Sullivan that they added, around draft time there. And, but even so, it does feel like if the right person came available, more than likely that such a player, any player at this point that they add, now that they're past Kwiatkowski and Sonihara, it feels like will would be somebody that's currently on another 90-man roster right now. And that's next to impossible to kind of predict or even build a list around players of who you think that might be. But, some position groups, slot cornerback, I think is a distinct possibility. There's been constantly, constant buzz about inside linebacker addition, and specifically maybe somebody that could play, in sub package situations and help in some coverages. So I don't think that's completely off the table. Even though you've got a couple of young kids and undrafted free agent running backs, I think that's, plausible that you could see a veteran type. At this point, obviously it would be a cheap veteran, but it would be a guy that could, potentially serve as your number 3 running back that could play on special teams. I'm just throwing out these as position plausibilities, not necessarily that'll happen. And then that leads me to I wanted to hit you with this cold. I didn't want to tip you off during our long pre show production meeting that we have, but. And all this kind of plays in together. But Alex, what the hell is this team going to do? What happens if Mason Cole goes down? Really? I mean, what is the current outcome right now if this team were to lose Mason Cole for whatever reason at center?
Short answer is I don't know. And I'm not sure if the team really knows right now what that plan B is. And so I think what you see in camp, whenever a team, brings in an outsider, at least in Pittsburgh, the way that it kind of happens is you go into camp, you let your guys compete, you see how they do. And if you're not happy with the results of that competition, you feel like there's really no clear winner, no one taking charge, then you go find an outside acquisition. So running back, for example, they're going to let those young guys compete. If they can't cut it, you find somebody else. Center, similar story. You let younger or newer guys like Kendrick Green, like Ryan McCollum, like potentially Spencer Anderson, maybe Nate Herbig, not a new guy or not a young guy, but a new guy. Maybe he picks up some snaps there. If you're not happy with that, then you look outside. So short answer is it's really an open competition. I don't know who the front runner really is right now. I don't think there is a front runner. You could name somebody, but it really wouldn't carry any sort of weight. And you let them compete this summer, see how, maybe Green could progress. Maybe McCollum, to me, is a guy that I think is a camp sleeper. We'll see how Spencer Anderson looks. And if those guys can't hack it, then you look outside the organization.
I mean, because you've got a lot of guys that on that list that could potentially, fit maybe that role, but none of them have extensive NFL experience at the position.
There's a lot of in theory guys. In theory, he could do it. We got to see it in action, though.
And then how much comfort does that have, even if you were able to get a guy ready from the start of training camp to the start of regular season to potentially be that guy? I mean, you're going to have to get that guy some snaps during the preseason, right? So for sure. I mean, and even if you felt comfortable with a guy like Herbig, let's say, I mean, how much confidence do you go in to the season? I mean, because you're one snap away from him being in there and him just not having the overall experience and the line calls. And I mean, it sets up to be kind of a catastrophic situation.
Well, he would have to get reps in the summer. Obviously, if they're going to consider him to be an option, you can't not give that guy reps during camp and then expect him to be the backup center to start week 1. So, I would presume if it's an internal option, whoever it is going to be somebody that's getting time there this summer. You're right. The outside guys are tough because you bring him in late. They're trying to, get acclimated to your system. They got to be that smartest guy on the line, making the line calls, have some sort of chemistry and work with ideally all of your quarterbacks. But, typically it ends up being the backup. So it's a tough situation. But if you're going outside, obviously that means that you're just not trusting or comfortable with your internal options. And so you kind of take the cost of the newness and the early growing pains if you feel like none of your current guys can do the job effectively enough.
I mean, across the line right now, obviously this team has addressed the line a lot this offseason, and you feel pretty good overall about not only, the starters, but the depth for the most part, except the center position, right?
Yeah, I think overall they've done a good job. You feel better at guard, where you have your starters who are established in, say, Malu and Daniels, and your top backup in Herbig. So you're good there. At tackle, you have more a core for Broderick Jones, much better depth there overall, can insulate against injury. Center really was not addressed to that degree. So it's a fair point. That's why for me, I kind of beat this dead horse some, but Jimmy Morrissey of Houston makes so much sense because he has that connection with Kenny Pickett where even if it is just say, God forbid, halftime of week one, Mason Cole goes down, Morrissey has to come in. You already have experience with your quarterback and your center because those guys were quarterback and center together at Pitt. And so I think really Morrissey makes so much sense from that aspect of he'll still have to adjust the Pittsburgh system. There's still going to be some difficulty in that, but I think it'd be an easier transition and you won't have that concern of my backup center has never taken a snap with my starting quarterback. And now we're in the third quarter of a game and we're trying to, get out with a victory and make this thing work. There's going to be a lesser stress over that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is something that's obviously outside linebacker. We've talked about that position over the years quite a bit. They have finally, it feels like, properly addressed that with Golden and along those lines there. So feel better about that. But I just pulled up a post that I wrote on May 2nd. Steelers offseason roster construction post-draft might be center of attention. Ha ha. Mm-hmm. And then obviously you've written about Morrissey. And this isn't a new topic for us, but, I'm doing this 90 and 30 series now and about, 15, 18 players into it now. And you just, you start going more into the deeper parts of the roster with some of these guys. And in fact, this last post of mine that I just wrote up, I think it's either up this, I think it's up this morning with Mason Cole and James Daniels included in that group of three players there. It really hit me again that, man, and let's, Mason Cole obviously was to me, I think he played better than expectations in his first season in Pittsburgh. I would expect him in his second season and in the Pat Myers system to make potentially another jump. But let's not fool ourselves here. I don't think Mason Cole right now would be confused as a top 5 center in the NFL. Maybe he can get into the top 10 category with a solid season, but and that assumes he stays healthy. And to me right now, when you look at this offense overall as a 90-man unit right now and the depth related to it, to me, the backup center position just jumps out.
Sure, I'm with you. I mean, slot corner as well, but they've added a lot of guys. They're just going to have to let those guys compete, and we'll see what rises to the top and will it be enough. But it's a similar conversation at center. So, I've kind of gone back and forth. When I had the podcast with Josh last week, my thought was, maybe Spencer Anderson could be that guy. But I really think Ryan McCollum could be a sleeper. He's got the size. He can play guard. He can play center. He's got a bit of NFL experience, 100 snaps in 2021 with the Lions, was on Pittsburgh's practice squad last year. So he's got a full year, a full off season now in Pittsburgh system. He was signed late in camp last year. So it was kind of catching that moving train. I really think McCollum's a guy that is a name to watch to capture that backup center spot if it's going to be an internal option.
All right. Well, I mean, it's something definitely to watch moving forward here. And especially when we get into preseason and all like that. I don't think this is going to be a position that they address right now. Obviously, I mean, you're right here in the heart of the slow part of the offseason. Obviously, offseason workouts are done with, but it will be interesting once training camp and preseason gets underway here to see which way they move with this, and specifically, who's number 2 right out of the chute.
Who do you think in that first training camp practice when we come back on that training camp recap episode and I tell you, Dave, Mason Cole, of course, your starting center, the backup center with the 2s was blank. We'll play some match game. Fill in the blank there. Who is that? Who is that number 2 center? Is that Kendrick Green?
It feels like it's Kendrick Green, at least from what we're hearing or seeing or reading or whatnot at this point.
Yeah, I'm probably with you as well to start. And again, that's just to start. Nothing set in stone. And we've seen guys run with the 2s and end up getting cut or become number 3. Anthony Miller was getting a lot of, early snaps in camp last year before he got hurt, and he kind of was falling down the depth chart. So, yeah, we'll see overall. How does, I know we're kind of still a little ahead of this, but second team O-line to start camp. I mean, first team O-line, we expected to be more, say, Malu, Cole, Daniels, Okorafor. Agreed?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's going to be the debate to see if the rookie Broderick Jones can do enough to bypass Dan Moore, but
sure, I'm just saying, like, first day of practice, just
right.
First reps.
Yeah, that sounds good. The second team, let's see. I would go Jones, Kevin Dotson.
Oh, you go Dotson. Okay. Yeah, I get that.
Then I would go probably Kendrick Green, probably Herbig, right guard.
Mm-hmm.
And LaRaven Clark, I guess, right tackle.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd be surprised if it wasn't that configuration for both first and second team. And again, that's just the start, just as a baseline thing we'll be working with.
True or false? This team will add a center, not currently on the 90-man roster, that'll be on the week 1 53-man roster.
That's a really good question. I mean, just to, give you an answer that doesn't carry really any weight, I'll say true.
I'll say true as well, too, just because it feels like such a big hole right now.
Yeah, but again, you go into camp, let those guys compete, evaluate before you start making moves. That's why those moves come at the end of camp, trades, and obviously when guys get cut, by that point, every team's evaluated their guys, and you're not making any moves before guys have a chance to prove themselves or not prove themselves.
Right.
All right, Dave, speaking of your 90 and 30 series, you've been moving right along. I think, you have 4 of them up now, I believe, since the last time we did the podcast. So do you kind of want to run through some of the names here as you've kind of worked your way through the Steelers alphabet?
Yeah, and let's see. I think we left off with Luq Barcoo, Keeanu Benton, and Chris Boswell. Barcoo, nice story, obviously, coming out of the XFL. He's an outside corner. He does have very limited experience, I think, playing in the slot, but he's more one of those longer outside guys there. And obviously, had a foot kind of out of the league. He was an all XFL selection for his efforts with San Antonio this past spring here. Even so, when you look at what this team has done at the cornerback position this offseason, obviously bringing in Patrick Peterson, drafting Joey Porter Jr. and Corey Trice Jr. This guy's Barcoo's on the outside looking in. A lot would have to happen. It feels like for him to make the 53-man roster come week 1. To me, it feels like something would have to happen with James Pierre, and Pierre obviously has experience in the system, is a above average special teams player. It feels like if Barcoo's going to make the roster, his path has got to go through James Pierre and potentially maybe even having a little bit more help within there. So I think in conclusion, it feels like Barcoo might be battling for a practice squad spot.
That's a fair assessment. Overall, he's a guy that's a good scheme fit. I know some of the advanced stats on what the XFL, his team was doing earlier this year was a lot of cover one, a lot of man-heavy scheme. I did the report on him. There's some ball skills. He was a former wide receiver, and so he's a guy that tracks and can make plays on the football, can finish. Some questions about, can he play in zone? Can he flip his hips? Maybe that long speed, a little bit on that. But, he's a guy that, again, is that type of corner Pittsburgh wants. It has some size and has some ball skills and can play man coverage, and that's Luq Barcoo.
All right. I don't want to spend a lot of time on Keeanu Benton because obviously we've talked about him since draft day. He's going to make the 53-man roster, no question about that. The only question really at this point is, can he be a week 1 guy in the middle of that defense? And if not, how long will it take him to be that main cog in the middle of that defense?
Sure. My expectation, my hope is that Keeanu Benton is the week 1 starting nose tackle. If not, I will consider that a disappointment, barring, of course, if he was injured and that played a serious factor. So that's my first thought with Keeanu Benton.
Right. Not a lot, once again, it's more speculation at this point, obviously not related around him making the 53-man roster, but just how soon he starts seeing the field and then what is his outlook as far as playing time goes from there. Chris Boswell, another guy in that next set of 3, coming off of a disappointing season overall. He made all of his extra point attempts, but he was just 20 of 28 on field goal attempts. He dealt with that groin injury that landed him on the reserve injured list for 4 games. He's not a spring chicken anymore. He's 32 years of age and has missed 9 games in total over the course of the last 3 seasons. Obviously signed him to an extension last off season there. The thing with him is, you can't help but because of his contract and what he's done in the NFL, he's a virtual lock to continue, obviously in 2023. The big thing with him is he just needs to stay healthy, and pretty much, not fall off a cliff during the offseason as far as his accuracy and distance and all like that. The Steelers did bring in former Clemson kicker BT Potter as an undrafted free agent this offseason, probably to help take some of that summer kicking chores off of Boswell's plate to ensure he stays healthy there. But the only real question with Boswell, I think at this point, is can he return, to being the Boswell that we saw in 2021? That's health and health only is really the only question when it comes to Boswell this summer.
Sure. Hopefully it's like 2018, 2019, where 2018 was miserable and he bounced back, got healthy for 2019. Hopefully it's the same way for 2022 to 2023. Even despite, last year being pretty shaky, the dude was 7-9 from 50 plus. I mean, has anybody conquered 50 plus in Pittsburgh the way that Chris Boswell has? Right. They haven't. And so despite that down year, you still see a really high level of success in some of those long range field goals. My hope for him in this, it would have to be where Braden Mann beats out Presley Harvard for the punting job, is if you could take Boswell off being that kickoff specialist, which matters even less given that we're going to see decreasing kick returns by about 7 to 10% this year. If Mann were to win the job because Mann has a kickoff specialist background, that would reduce some of that burden on Boswell. I can't imagine, as he's fighting that groin injury last year, that kickoffs were feeling good on his body. So anything you can do to kind of remove that workload and just allow him to really focus on being the best kicker that he can be on field goals is ideal for him, ideal for the team.
Yeah, and on both sides of him spending time on the IR, how did that groin injury play into the accuracy issues on the field goals?
Sure. I'm sure that it did. Any sort of change in tweak of your technique, anything that doesn't feel quite right. Kickers are creatures of habit and rhythm and form, and if anything is not as it should be, it's going to mess with you physically and then probably mentally as well.
All right. The next 3 that I did, let's see. We got Jordan Byrd, Dan Chisena, and LaRaven Clark. And Byrd, obviously one of the team's undrafted free agents, and they label him as a wide receiver returner on the team website and all. Although he was mostly used in a running game as a running back there. Undersized, this guy has one path to the 53-man roster this summer, and that's the Stephon Logan path. It seems like every couple of years we have a Stephon Logan. In fact, probably every summer, Stephon Logan kind of reference here. He was a pretty fantastic returner overall at San Diego State. That's his ticket, and really, it feels like his ticket to staying in Pittsburgh past final cutdowns, because I don't think you're going to keep a returner kind of specific related guy on your practice squad, unless you've got an injury or something, maybe a guy's dealing with or something like that. So Jordan Byrd, once he gets into the stadiums in preseason, he's got to take a couple back to the house, I think, to stay in Pittsburgh.
It's funny we mentioned him today. I have a video on the site about Trey Archer's career. I kind of see a lot of parallels where Archer was more running back than receiver in college, and that's what Byrd was. And they tried to, now they're calling Byrd more of a receiver return man. And, that's kind of as you said, the path that Byrd has is only as a return guy. To do that on the 53, either Calvin Austin has to tank or get hurt. And even then, they may just turn to Gunnar Olszewski. I could see Byrd on practice squad. It's a 14-man practice squad. There's some space there as a backup return guy. It was 16. Are they back to 14 or are they at 16 now? I forget what they're at. Is it 16?
I think
you might be right. I because the rules
16.
have changed because of COVID, and I wasn't sure if they had flip-flopped and gone back down. But even 16, then okay, even more spots to keep a guy like that. So I could see practice squad if he has a good summer. But yeah, in terms of what his role is, especially offensively, like how he's going to be used in camp, I guess some slot type stuff, but it's going to be obviously a really hard path for him.
All right, Dan Chisena, former undrafted free agent in 2020 out of Penn State, spent the last 3 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. Doesn't have much of anything on his resume when it comes to wide receiver production. This guy, though, has been a special teams type player and a fairly decent one at that. But even so, he would have to make a lot of plays on special teams during the rest of the summer to even give himself an outside chance to make the 53-man roster. And beyond that, obviously practice squad could come into play there. But I mean, you want to talk about a guy that's got one heck of a uphill battle ahead of him when it comes to 53-man roster or really sticking around even on the practice squad is Dan Chisena. If he had more to his resume as a receiver, that would help his cause. Unfortunately, he doesn't. Once again, has some nice special teams tape out there, but it just doesn't feel like that's going to be enough.
I thought he was a sleeper before Miles Boykin re-signed because I thought Chisena had a chance to take on that Boykin role as that number 5, number 6 wide receiver, special teamer, gunner. That's what Chisena has done in Minnesota his first couple of years in the NFL. He was a track guy, didn't really play much college football, and so he's got an interesting path to the NFL. But with Boykin coming back, who's bigger, a better blocker in the run game, some of those 13 personnel packages, and a more established receiver, it's really hard to see Chisena make it. Boykin would probably have to get hurt, and then Chisena would still have to do a lot to try to capture that 5th or 6th wide receiver spot.
All right, next one on the list, LaRaven Clark. Signed to a 1-year veteran benefit contract, I think ahead of the draft. And at that point, I think the Steelers had 3 tackles under contract, right around in there, but only $50,000 getting guaranteed money for him. Look, this team has since drafted Broderick Jones. You would still think, based on the way this depth chart looks right now, that you have to like LaRaven Clark's chances of making the 53-man roster as that 4th tackle. If he does make the 53-man roster and assuming Broderick Jones has progressed the way that you want him to progress and at least have a helmet on game day, you could be looking at a guy like LaRaven Clark that spends a lot of time on the inactive list during the 2023 season. Regardless, and assuming he does make the 53-man roster, you don't want to see LaRaven Clark play a lot of or any meaningful snaps in 2023. So, and if he did have to play at all in 2023, it's more than likely going to be at right tackle.
Right. Some really ugly tape as I went through it last year. He does have some size and length that Pittsburgh likes in tackles, has experience on both sides. He's not a guarantee. Obviously, he's not a guarantee to make the team, but they only carry 3 tackles last year on the 53, right? And more a core 4 and Trent Scott, correct?
Yeah. So and once again, I think it's all going to come down to roster construction with him. And,
sure.
If you're, I haven't drawn out the whole 53 in a couple of weeks now, so I don't know kind of where he fits in there. overall. But it's all going to come down to, I think, to how many offensive linemen they keep in total.
Mm-hmm.
And if they did keep kind of 4 tackle types. Now, look, you obviously have a 7th round draft pick in Spencer Anderson with some position flexibility, and they probably hope that maybe he can show something at multiple positions through the rest of this summer that maybe would make a guy like LaRaven Clark expendable.
But I will say, Josh and I had this conversation, and I think you and I have mentioned it before. Let's say that Dan Moore beats out Broderick Jones during the summer for the week 1 left tackle job. How confident are we in that Jones will be the slam dunk swing guy if he's not getting much, if any, work at right tackle during the summer?
Well, I would expect him to get some sort of work at right tackle. I would hope he would. I
think he'll get some, but obviously they want him at left tackle to evaluate him at left tackle, and I think Dan Moore's going to get a lot more reps at right tackle than Jones will.
Look, I understand the inexperience with when it comes to Broderick Jones, obviously, but I mean, you don't. To me, you've got to go in this thing thinking, man, at worst he's going to be the swing tackle come week 1.
But then he's going to have to get a lot of right tackle work because he does not have much of that on his resume. I don't think he has any starts there at Georgia. He played there some, but I don't know how many.
He did talk about practicing there almost every practice, though.
But how much in a Georgia game? I mean, going from practice to Georgia to win a game at right tackle at the NFL level is still a pretty big jump.
Well, I mean, if that ended up being the case where you had questions about, if you're coming out of the summer with him not being your starting left tackle,
mm-hmm.
and you were worried about him being able to be the swing guy at that point, well, then obviously you'd have to have another tackle that would get a helmet at least to start the season.
Right.
And that would unequivocally probably be, your main choice would be LaRaven Clark.
Now, I think the third thing that could happen, and I mentioned this to Josh as well, is that let's say that you didn't feel super comfortable with Jones at right tackle. You could still have him be active, and let's say a Corfer went down, Dan Moore flips to right tackle, Jones comes in left tackle. I know that switching multiple positions is not ideal for anybody, but I think that is another path that Pittsburgh could take.
Well, normally they only dress 7 offensive linemen for games, though, right?
Right.
So you're essentially saying you would dress 4 of those 7 would be tackles?
No. I'm saying that Clark wouldn't dress. Your backup tackle would be Broderick Jones, but he wouldn't be there to be a right tackle. If a Corfer went down, Dan Moore goes to right tackle. Jones slides in at left tackle where he's more natural, more comfortable, and Dan Moore becomes effectively the backup right tackle still.
Well, that circles back to what I said. I mean, if they ended up keeping 4 tackles in total, there's a good chance that LaRaven Clark could be an inactive.
Right. Sure. Just some thoughts there. I think we had skipped over the receiver trio, Boykin, Bradley, and Butler, if you want to go back to those 3 names.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Boykin obviously kind of signed later in the offseason there. Good special teams player. I think the biggest hope with him in his first season in Pittsburgh is that he's completely learn the offense and not that you want to see it a lot, but a guy that, God forbid you had to put him on the field more, a guy that can at least function maybe in at least 2 positions there, the Z and maybe, the slot or something along those lines there. I mean, this guy's predominantly been a Z, right? And he hangs his hat right now on his special teams play, which was pretty damn good. He's going to be hard to get off of the roster because of that. Even though he had a lot of snaps in 2022, 130 offensive snaps in total. He only missed 1 game last season due to an oblique injury, but he still only had 2 receptions for 11 yards on 3 total targets. Man, if you can't, 3 total targets on 130 offensive snaps, and you're not, and he's a good blocker, I think, in general, but it's not like you have instant recall to thinking, oh man, thank goodness Boykin was on the field for that running play.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I think you're hurting yourself if you have a guy like that has to hit the offense for 100 snaps that you only target him 3 times. You might as well be playing with 10 people out there, basically is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think his role's pretty clearly defined. Special teamer, 13 personnel, run blocker. I still remember they threw that deep ball to him week 1 against the Bengals last year, incomplete. They never tried that again. But yeah, he's a really quality special teams guy. And obviously, if the other guys stay healthy, then Boykin will see minimal time offensively.
I mean, you got him inside the bubble right now, right?
Oh yeah, I think he's at number 5. Number 4 receiver, special teamer. I think his spot is pretty comfortable.
All right, next guy, Jamarcus Bradley, who ended the 2022 season on the Steelers practice squad, a Louisiana product who been around the NFL for a little bit. He's actually seen, a handful, I think 171 offensive snaps played in total in his NFL career. He's logged 54 more special teams snaps so far. I think has 3 total special teams tackles, has some extremely limited returner experience at the NFL level with 2 kickoff returns for 49 yards. But if we're being really, really honest here, he has virtually no shot at making the Steelers 53-man roster. So many negative things would have to happen for him to be able to do that. I think when you're looking at a guy like Jamarcus Bradley the rest of this summer, you're thinking, can he stay healthy? And even if he can stay healthy, we've seen a lot of times guys at the end of some lines, position group lines, because other position group lines get short, they end up getting bounced off the roster. So I think first and foremost, the goal for Jamarcus Bradley is to have a lot of luck, not only with his health, but with lines in training camp. And second, he needs to show enough for the remainder of the summer to warrant being kept around for a practice squad spot. But I think 53-man roster is out of the question, barring some catastrophe at the wide receiver position group.
He's going to be taping some ankles. Everybody good? Everybody feel good? Yep. Everybody getting cut here? It's going to jeopardize my spot. Yeah, I'm with you overall. I need to learn more about him, so it's one guy I do want to watch to get a better feel for his background, his skill set. I know he has some size, but I don't know too much about his game. But obviously that wide receiver room is super crowded, and so it's practice squad at best for him.
Hakeem Butler is a guy that's going to be fun to watch the remainder of this summer here. Obviously, he came out of the XFL, tremendous season with them, 51 catches, almost 600 yards, 8 touchdowns. Former mid-round draft pick who first and foremost, he's got to continue to move past kind of that draft bust label that's been on him for several years now. A big guy who really projects as a big slot at the NFL level here. Can he, with being a big body guy, show you enough the rest of the summer on special teams? Because if you're going to be that 4A, 4B, number 5 wide receiver on this team, you better be able to contribute in some form or fashion in special teams. One of the knocks coming comes with him, even coming out of the XFL, is those drops, right? He needs to have a fairly flawless summer overall. I do like the big body aspect of him. And within that, look, he's not a burner per se, but he's still, we saw this in the XFL, he can stretch the field vertically and specifically in the middle of the hash marks. And that's nice to see when it comes to a guy like that. A guy that's big enough that probably should have better yards after the catch than what we've seen so far. But, look, this guy, like it or not, coming out of the XFL, he's still got to move past that draft bust label. He's going to have to be able to play on special teams. He's got to stop dropping the football. He's got to be damn near solid perfect the rest of the summer. Right now, I would say his chances of making a 53-man roster probably sit around 50-50.
I think roster construction will have a lot to do with that, because I feel like they have their 5 receivers are pretty penciled in, right? And Deontay, Pickens, Robinson, Boykin, and Calvin Austin, barring anything catastrophic with him. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So it's a question of, do they keep 6 receivers, or do they keep an extra tight end or running back or offensive lineman or something on defense? I think that's kind of the battle there. And obviously, you know, how Butler performs will partially dictate whether or not he could become that 6 wide receiver. If he is, he's probably a weekly inactive to start his Steelers career if it gets that far. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for him. There's a height, weight, speed element. He was a dude coming out of Iowa State, had a good, you know, spring with the XFL. I just want to caution. I think there can be a little bit of too much, you know, expectations for a guy that has never caught an NFL pass. That's still Hakeem Butler. And so I don't want to lose sight of that. I'm excited to watch him. It's a fresh start. I'm sure he's gotten better since his time in the NFL back in 2020, 2021, but it's still a guy that has never caught an NFL pass. We just have to keep those things in proportion for our expectations.
Look, he's a candidate to make 32 53-man rosters this year, potentially, you know?
In the sense of a waiver claim, if he would.
Yeah, I mean, look, yeah. Because, you know, the injuries around the NFL are obviously going to happen. Mm-hmm. And we don't know how the Steelers roster construction is going to go as far as numbers at the wide receiver position. And if he does stay dead solid, perfect, you know, and you know, throughout the rest of the summer there, he could very well put himself in a position, especially if he's able to contribute some on special teams, you know. Right. And this is it for him, right? I mean, he's got a lot to show this summer. Because if he doesn't, he'll probably permanently have 2 feet outside the NFL or just be a practice squad player moving forward here. So this is a guy that's really competing for a 53-man roster spot for 32 teams right now, if we're being honest.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good way to frame that. So we'll see. I want to see if he plays outside at all. There's some attractiveness to some of that outside jump ball stuff, but I think he will get a lot of work in the slot, and that obviously creates an interesting matchup advantage when you're going against some smaller nickel corners.
Well, I like, I think big slots have a role in the NFL, and especially if they can hold on to the football and yak on these short passes and stretch the field vertically occasionally when asked. And, you know, once again, if he can prove he can do those things, you know, you might have to kind of whittle out a roster spot for him.
Sure. We'll see what happens.
All right, let's see the 3 that went up this morning. You know, not really a lot to talk about here overall. Mason Cole, Dylan Cook, and James Daniels. I mean, the story about Mason Cole and James Daniels, both those guys. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Both those guys are going to make the 53-man roster. Both those guys should be starters. The good thing with both those guys, second year in the Pat Myers system, you would hope that both those guys see an increase in quality of their play, second year in the system, with both of them specifically. Well, James Daniels specifically should have familiar counterparts on each side of them. One side Cole, one side Chukwuma Okorafor. And when it comes to Cole, I think the biggest thing with him, man, is please stay healthy. And you know, once again, I think the upside when it comes to these two, the funny thing about James Daniel that when writing this up, man, the kid is not even 26 years. It feels like he's been in the NFL so long, and he has. I mean, this is his 6th NFL season, and he's still only 25 years old. He'll turn 26 in September, I think. I mean, so you're talking about a guy that's pretty accomplished overall. As an NFL player, but he's still so young. So, you know, can he make that next step where you're talking about, man, James Daniel is a top 5 right guard in the NFL. I think that's plausible. You know, if he stays healthy and this offense does what we think it could potentially do, as far as, especially from the run blocking category there. But and then, you know, we had to talk about Mason Cole a little bit earlier in the podcast as well too. It's hard to imagine a conversation where you're talking about Mason Cole being a top 5 center in the NFL, but could he firmly put himself in a position where you're talking about, man, Mason Cole is unequivocally a top 10 center in the NFL. And I think there's a possibility of that.
I'm with you on all counts there. So Daniels was what, 20 when he got drafted? I mean, trying to think how old he was coming out.
Yeah. I mean, you look at hold on a minute here. Let me pull up the birth date on him.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be one of the youngest players to be drafted. I mean, the only one I could think that was clearly younger was Amobi Okoye when he was 19, when the Texans took him about a decade plus ago. But yeah, 26 years old, second contract. You don't see that combination.
He was born September 13th, 1997. So that put him 25 right now. How old was he when he was drafted?
I don't think he was 19. He's had to have been at least 20. Because you would have heard about that more. He had to have been in the early 20s. He might have just turned 20. But anyway, point is, I just remember Daniels last year during the summer coming back to you each day, Dave, and saying, Dave, I'm real concerned about James Daniels. He's really struggling in camp. And you kind of, as you worked your way through it, you saw the bulk of the line struggle as they adjusted the Myers system. Daniels, a new team, all that newness, was a lot. It weighed pretty heavy, but he got a whole lot better the second half of the year in terms of being able to use the hop step to stall out bull rushes and just be more comfortable with his hand placement and some of those on-body sets against D tackles that are covering you up. And so you saw a big jump in growth, and you would expect, obviously, the growing pains to be gone and really hit the ground running for him and for Mason Cole and for all the returning offensive linemen. And that in itself is probably the biggest thing. Just, you've worked out all the kinks and all the cobwebs, and you're just focusing on the task at hand and not trying to learn a system.
It's a way too early conversation to have, but because of his age, because of kind of his pedigree, and let's assume 2023 is his best season to date. Is there an outside possibility that a year from now we could be talking about, man, do you think James Daniels, might be, might they sign him to an extension? Because obviously next year would 2024, he would be entering the final year of his 3-year contract. Could that be a conversation we're having a year from now?
I think so. I really do. Because you've been in this mode of trying to find the guys and build this offensive lineup the way that you did in the early 2010s. And so eventually you got out of that phase in the 2010s, and it became about retaining those guys, retaining Pouncey, DeCastro, Marcus Gilbert, a little bit later, Alejandro Villanueva, re-signing Ramon Foster. And so right now, Pittsburgh's still in that phase of finding guys, building the group, and hopefully they can work through that this year and next, and they can kind of transition to that next phase of, okay, we have the guys, now we need to retain this relatively young core. And Daniels, I think, would certainly be at the top of that list. And so, yeah, if he has a really good 2023, I think extension talk is totally reasonable and probably the right direction to go this time next year.
Although on the flip side of that, you could say they technically have control of him for the next 3 seasons after this season, right? Because 2024, obviously being the final year of his contract, then 2025, you could tag, and then you could obviously tag back to years, even if you wanted to past that. But I'm not saying it's going to happen. I just am throwing it out there as what would it could we potentially be in a plausible scenario where we're saying, man, Jay, what a great, unequivocally, James Daniels was the Steelers' best lineman in 2023. He's only 25 years old. Do they need to go ahead and lock him up until he's 30?
Sure. I think that's a potentially real conversation to be had a year from now.
All right. The round peg in the square hole of these three, Dylan Cook, obviously not signed not too terribly long ago. Montana product, entered the NFL in 2022 as an undrafted free agent with the Buccaneers, spent most of the 2022 season on the Buccaneers practice squad, has yet to play an NFL snap. Okay measurables overall with him. In 3 preseason games last year with the Buccaneers, he only played 73 total snaps. And all those snaps come to find out, all those snaps with the preseason last year with the Buccaneers came at left tackle, but he mostly played right tackle in college there. So, look, once again, a lot of negative things have got to happen with that offensive line for him to even have an outside shot at making the 53-man roster. A guy like Cook is battling for a practice squad spot this summer, right?
He is. You're right. It's interesting, some of those parallels I mentioned, Byrd and Archer, and to hear Alejandro Villanueva speak on today's episode of the New Heights podcast. Dylan Cook has a bit of that background in the sense of the kind of weird position change to offensive line. He was a quarterback initially in college and then transferred to Montana, and then became a right tackle for them. And so he doesn't have the military background that Villanueva has, or the receiver background, but weird position, weird journey to end up as an offensive tackle. And so just interesting there. Don't know too much about his game beyond that, but just want to see how this guy looks because he's still pretty new to the position.
Yes, he is. And once again, I mean, if the lines get short at another position during training camp, he, through no fault of his own, he might be outdoors. So who knows how much longer we'll be talking about him moving forward once training camp gets underway. But at best, he's battling for a practice squad spot.
Right. I would say that generally speaking, offensive linemen don't get the heave-ho and those kind of roster shuffles quite as much because you basically need to have 15 to 16 offensive linemen throughout training camp just in case somebody gets a day off or gets dinged. You have enough there for the lines. Obviously, they can shuffle guys out to replace him with another offensive lineman, as they did last year with a ton of those backup guys when McCollum and Dunkel and others came in. But I think his odds of kind of getting the short end of the stick are a little less likely just because you kind of need to have so many linemen for a practice.
All right. I think we're caught up on my 90 and 30, right?
Yeah. So I don't know who the next group is, but I'm excited for that. And we'll recap the new list of names on the next episode, Monday, Tuesday, whenever we come back.
All right.
Anything else here? I don't know how much of the Villanueva interview you got to listen to. I got to listen to most of it. Really entertaining. Really, obviously just a crazy life and so many interesting things that Villanueva has done. He's now a fruit farmer in southern Florida, down in Miami, but a lot of good stories there. And even mentioned, and I didn't know this, that whenever he had signed with Pittsburgh, he was in the office ready to sign on their practice squad. And the Eagles called him back and said, "Hey, we want to bring you back to our team." And he said, "Listen, guys, I'm about to sign with the Steelers here." And so he, turned down the chance to go back to Philadelphia. Could you imagine what that would have looked like had he taken the Eagles up on their offer and went back to Philadelphia? Probably never has the career that he does. So just a wild moment there.
Yeah, smart decision. Looking back at it now in the rearview mirror, smart decision on his part because he made a little bit of money.
Yeah, he had said he only wanted to play. His goal was to only play 1 year in the NFL so he could pay for business school, and then ended up playing a lot longer and making a lot more money. So really interesting. Yeah, he said that Pittsburgh brought him in for a workout initially as a defensive lineman because he was at the end in Philadelphia. And then John Mitchell looked at him and said, "You're not going to be a defensive lineman." And Munchak looked at him, kind of put him through a couple of drills and said, "Yeah, I can try to work with you." And of course he did.
All right. What else did he say? What did he say about James Harrison? I have not heard the interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he just talked about being on the practice squad for that first year in 2014. And I guess that was when Harrison had come back, and going against him in practice and kind of just having some of those opportunities to face him as he kind of was learning the position on the practice squad and kind of taking his lumps there, but got better. And essentially saying, at one point, I felt like I could block James Harrison. And if I can block James Harrison, then I can block anybody, including James Harrison. And so that kind of gave him the confidence to realize he could play in the NFL. And then a year later, he's the starting left tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
All right. We'll sort through the rest of this stuff, these quotes that are coming out today, and we'll be back obviously next week, probably Tuesday, right? Barring anything happening like a Alex Highsmith signing or a contract extension signing or something like that. So we'll kind of save some of that to potentially talk about on Tuesday.
Yeah, that sounds good. Levi Wallace have anything interesting to say? I don't think I saw any notable quots to kind of compare.
He was asked about Patrick Peterson and the leadership and how both those two are kind of helping each other. Now that they're teammates, obviously had some quality things to say about Kenny Pickett. I think if anybody's interested in all that, we'll have a lot of posts up about that on SteelersDepot.com, not only on Friday but through the rest of the weekend.
All right, sounds good. Any emails, Dave? Or are we
Yeah, I'll hit a couple
today.
here real quick. One from
Okay.
Paul Brown says, just want to run some hypotheticals when it comes to the cap. In the event the team agrees to a contract that exceeds the cap limit, I'm curious to know how compliance is enforced. Does the league step in and take action to ensure the team rectifies the situation promptly, or is it a slap on the wrist but the player can continue under the agreed contract? Is the punishment worth complying? Look, in today's day and age now, when these contracts come across, they have to go through certain channels and all, and they won't be approved if they exceed the salary cap. So there's now, it's not like the old days, probably when it was pen and paper and that was it, and you had to mail it off to the league office and those kind of things. There are safeguards in now where teams will not go over the salary cap there. They just won't approve the contract or anything along those lines. I think where the gray area comes in there, and even that now, you go back to the old Will Wolford story, right? With Rooney wanting to pay him, forget exactly how it went. I got it so many
I'm trying to think. What was the issue with him?
There was something about he agreed to. Let me see if I can pull it up on the site.
I know you've written about this last year, 2 years ago.
The details all of a sudden have become kind of foggy in my head. Let's see if I can find it real quick here. I'm not finding it all of a sudden, but there was something along the lines that I don't know, cash payment or something like that, because of agreeing to some aspect of the contract that he didn't hit because of playing time or injuries or something like that. That ended up putting the Steelers in salary cap violation. Let me look on the regular.
Yeah, I have an article from the Post-Gazette, but I don't see a lot of details other than Pittsburgh self-reported there was an error. I don't remember exactly what the details were on that. But yeah, short answer is all contracts get reviewed by the NFL league office and have to be officially approved. So if a team ever tried to do something they couldn't do, the NFL would prevent that before that contract becomes official.
Let's see. Wolford signed with the Steelers as a free agent in '96, specifically to play left guard. A Pro Bowl tackle had a bonus written into his contract, paying him additional money if he was moved back to his customary and more taxing position. Left tackle, after 2 seasons of light duty at left tackle, the starting left guard agreed to renegotiate his deal to help free up salary cap. For the Steelers, the renegotiations apparently removed $400,000. Somehow they tried to pay him that money or something. It was a good faith. What the root of it is Rooney tried to do good faith on his part, and it ended up being a salary cap violation because of it there. But okay. Long story short, when it comes to this, is now there's safeguards in place, and teams can't go over the cap. It won't happen.
Is there anything that prevents a player from being paid? I don't want to say under the table, because obviously that's not allowed, but just an owner just giving player money or some sort of asset that's not reflected through the salary cap. I assume there's something against that, but you couldn't just pay somebody, here's $500K out of my own pocket to
I would think that's
come.
all that stuff. In any payments that teams make are probably highly scrutinized, whatever they are, throughout the league office. And if there's any question of, well, why did you pay this money X amount of dollars, it would highly be scrutinized.
And you can't give a player a stake in your franchise. Is that allowed? I mean, that kind of was with Tom Brady. There was kind of some either rumblings or thoughts about that. Could you, in lieu of money, just give him a stake, 2% into the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Oh man, you're over my pay grade now when it comes to that.
Testing you.
I would have to research that kind of stuff, and I don't know how worthy that is of my time.
Because you're seeing, isn't that happening in soccer? Didn't Messi, or I'm not a big soccer guy, but somebody just, got obviously a ton of money, but wasn't there some sort of a stake in ownership?
You're way out of my lane now.
Okay.
I haven't paid attention to any of that now when it comes to soccer or anything.
All right, fair enough.
Let's see. Mark Richards has got a kind of lengthy one. I'll wait on here. Let's see. David records. Dave and Alex, fast forward to next offseason. The team finished with 10 wins and won a playoff game. Matt Canada has been extended. What metrics were accomplished in the season regarding points per game and adjusted net yards, net passing yards? I'm curious what you guys think needs to happen specifically this year for Canada to be extended. First and foremost, yeah, look, you better win a lot of games. You better score more points than last season. I think it's got to be a situation where you can see it, touch it, feel it, taste it. All aspects of that. Kenny's adjusted net yards per passing attempt number would have to probably be over 6.5 at a minimum, I think. Less statistically, I think. Outside of things like that, and obviously points scored. I mean, you got to see it on tape. I mean, it's got to scream, man. This offense really made improvements, and it would be a bit of a detriment to switch out an offensive coordinator after Kenny making these kind of strides and the offense making these kind of strides with this young group of players. That's probably going to be a good core in 2024. You'd have to see it, feel it, taste it, all that. And, I would think a playoff game win within that would need to, would hopefully be involved in that.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything mystical or magical or some sort of like crazy number they have to hit that's like super in the weeds. It's just, are you scoring more per game? Is Pickett progressing? Is this team winning? Is the red zone offense better? Just some of those basic benchmarks of, is there offensive progression and is this team successful? If those things happen, then there's a chance he does come back.
Yeah, but once again, I think if we're even in that realm of having that discussion, there's not going to be a gray area. I don't think it's going to either be, it's a legitimate talk that Canada should be extended, or he's out the door before we even get started. A month into the off season.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, we're up against it here. Obviously, been a long morning. We started this show a little bit later than normal. On top of it, need to get it processed and out there to all of yins. So we will be back probably on Tuesday and kind of pick up where we left off. We'll have several more 90 and 30 series players to discuss, and who knows what else. We'll talk about some of these interviews and all like that. So anything else to add, Alex?
Nope. Everybody have a great 4th of July. I mean, we'll probably come back before then. I'm not entirely sure the timeline, but have a good weekend, and we'll come back next week.
All right. You can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you want to donate to the cause, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button up right navigational bar. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, go to SteelersDepot.com. Hit the ad-free button up right navigational bar and follow the directions that way. So until next week, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.